everyone to another live stream. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are trying Hawaii Ka'u, another specialty coffee. Last week we explored Jamaica Blue Mountain, so we are going to explore a lot of history when it comes to Hawaiian coffee. This is a very, very intricate and interesting story. And it's a perfect story for a very intricate and flavorful cup of coffee. So today we are trying Hawaii Ka'u. It's a small lot coffee from the south side of the large island in Hawaii, and we are going to taste it on the pour over and the coffee press. So the reason why I brew it two different ways is so that we can kind of explore the different flavor notes that we get from different brewing methods, but from the same cup of coffee. And that's important to know so that we can kind of explore the different flavors, because we might not like a particular cup of coffee brewed one way, but we actually might like it brewed a different way just because we're getting different flavor notes. And so that's why I like to brew my coffee multiple ways, just so that I can explore for myself what flavors I'm going to like for that particular blend, and then that way I can kind of share with you guys just the different variety of flavors that you get from different brew methods. It's kind of cool. I kind of like teeter-totter back and forth between brew methods. With this particular cup, because it's like such a mild, well-balanced cup of coffee, and it's got those nutty notes, I think I'm really going to like the French press. Because with the French press, we're going to see a lot of those bitter, nutty notes come through with the sediment, but then we're still going to get a little bit of that sweetness. And then with the pour over, we're going to get a little bit of less of the nutty notes and more of that sweet flavor that comes with the Ka'u. And then we're going to explore the history and land of Ka'u and Hawaii itself, and then why it gets the particular flavors that this cup of coffee has. It's very interesting. I'm looking forward to sharing this story with you guys. It's a really, really cool story. So with the French press, I think I'm going to like this particular blend on the French press versus the pour over, just because I really like those nutty notes. And it's interesting because with the Hawaiian coffee, it's Latin American origin, so it's now it's a Guatemala, but it used to be Brazilian coffee. But we'll talk a little bit about that and how that went through its different changes. It's really, really cool. So with this coffee, it's gonna have notes of like nutty notes, and then a sweetness. And so with the small lot coffees, you're going to get like very specific flavors to the region that it came from. And that's important to note, because when you get like a generic bag of coffee that just says like Guatemala, you could be getting beans from different parts of Guatemala all over. And then when you do that, you're getting flavor notes of different areas all jam-packed into one bag. And so sometimes it's so jam-packed, you can't really taste the different flavor notes. You're really only going to get that one note that they all like share in common, which, you know, is typical to certain regions. So like a Guatemala coffee that's like a generic bag would probably have like chocolate notes, but you want to be able to taste any of the secondary notes because it's mixed with a whole bunch of secondary notes. And so with small lot coffee, you can get those specific flavors of like maybe like plantain, like herbal notes of like lavender, or spice notes of like cinnamon or pepper notes. So that's what's so important about these small lot coffees, and that's how it impacts the flavor. And so with Hawaiian coffee, it's a Guatemalan blend, and then over several hundred years of growing and cultivating coffee, this particular blend has adapted to its climate so that it grows perfectly for the climate in Hawaii. And so it's they call it the a Kona typica, and then the Kau probably calls theirs Kau typica, but that's the blend that is brought over to Hawaii is the Arabica typica blend. All right. If you guys have any questions about this particular coffee, go ahead and throw that up in chat. If you guys are new to the live stream, welcome. Hit that subscribe button down below and hit the bell as well so you're notified every time I go live or post up a new video. And if you guys are returning, thank you guys for returning. I am honored that you guys would show up for a second time or a third time or however many times you guys have watched my videos. I am honored. So we are about to taste Hawaii Kau on the pour over and the French press, and I am really excited to try the Kau on the French press. I have tried the Hawaii on the Clover machine, which is a specialty brewing machine designed to pull out all the flavors through like a vacuum suction. It's very similar to a French press, but instead of relying on the plunger, you have like an actual vacuum pressure that pulls out the moisture, so you're getting a lot more of those oils, but you're getting almost no sediment because it's a super fine mesh metal filter, so it filters out all those sediments, but you're getting all those oils. So it's like a super flavorful cup of coffee. On the Clover, the Kau is like very, very smooth, super easy to drink, black. It's not bitter at all. It's a really, really good cup of coffee. So I'm expecting the French press to be very, very similar, but with a little bit more bitterness because we're getting those sediments. But it's going to be just as flavorful because it's full immersion, and we're still going to get a decent amount of those oils. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Kau and how Hawaii obtained coffee in the first place. It's a very interesting story, and it's evolved over time, and it started off with like the fall of other trade commodities. And so we're going to explore the evolution of that in just a few moments. All right. All right, so now we're going to try the Hawaii Kau on the French press. So with this, we're going to get a lot more of those nutty notes. We're still going to see some of that sweet notes that come through, but it's going to be primarily those bitter nutty notes. Bitter nutty notes. Ooh, okay. So right off the bat, I really like what I smell. Like this, I'm really excited for the flavors of this coffee. It's got that strong nutty notes with that sweet scent. It literally screams Latin American coffee to me, and we're going to explore in our story in a little bit on why it would scream Latin American coffee. Really, really, it smells really good. I'm just by the smell of this coffee, I'm excited for it. It smells really, really good. Ooh. Wow. Okay. So those bitter notes much stronger than I was anticipating. It's not nearly as bold as some other coffees that you would get from like Indonesia, but it's still got like that strong like nutty kick. That sweetness definitely takes a back seat in the French press, but it definitely rides the aroma. You definitely smell the sweetness. It's not so much there in the flavor, but you can smell it. It's still a really good cup of coffee. The reason why I would say it's such a good cup of coffee is because it's got a really strong, bold, nutty bitter kick at the very beginning on the French press, but it's not like a lingering effect. It doesn't sit on your tongue and like hang out. It quickly fades away, so it's not gonna impact the tongue so much. So it's a very, very nice flavor after it washes away. That is good. It's kind of like a strong, like almost like an almond flavor. It's getting like that almond nutty flavor. It's really, really good. All right, so now we're gonna taste the pour over. So with the pour over, we're gonna see a lot less of those bitter, nutty flavors that we explored on the French press, but we're going to see a lot more of that bright, sweet flavor that we get in the description. So immediately, right off the bat, when I smell the coffee, I'm just getting a well-balanced scent. I'm getting a little bit of that sweetness, but then we're still getting a little bit of that nutty aroma as well. But it's balanced. It's not like I'm with the French press where that sweet aroma really rode the steam. So it really smells sweet. This particular cup of coffee, on the pour over, it smells very mild. It's very well balanced. So with this cup, it's definitely we're getting a lot more of those bright, sweet flavors on the sides of our tongue. Much more balanced cup of coffee. The bitterness definitely, I wouldn't say takes a back seat in this cup. I'd say that more or less the acidity and the bitter are kind of like uh, I'd say the bitterness is kind of like the pilot, and then the acidity is like the co-pilot in this cup of coffee. They're both steering the ship, but the bitterness still is in like main control of this cup. And the reason why I'd say that is because after I let the palate clear away, I'm getting some of that bitter after flavor of those nutty notes, and the bright, sweet, acidic flavor has kind of like washed away. So it's no longer there. We're getting a little bit of lingering bitter flavors, which is why I'd say that the the bitter nutty notes are like the core driver of this cup, while the bright, acidic flavors kind of come a little forward, take more of a front seat in the pour over versus the French press. Now, if I had to choose between the French press and the pour over, I would definitely choose the French press on this particular cup, just because those bright acidic notes in this cup of coffee I'm not a big fan of. I prefer to get more of those nutty bitter notes. And then what's nice about these particular bitter nutty notes is that they don't, like I said, it doesn't linger on, so you don't have to worry about it impacting your tongue later on. It's gonna wash away nice and clean, so you don't have to worry about having to pair this cup of coffee with a food item to make the leftover notes enjoyable. This is a well balanced cup of coffee on the French press. All right, so we're going to continue to sip on that cup of coffee while we talk about the history of Hawaiian coffee and how ka'u came to be. So, back in the 1800s, Hawaii specialized in farming sugar and pineapple. That was like their primary export. They were famous for farming those particular items, and all the farmers there, that's what they did. They farmed sugar and pineapple, and so coffee was first introduced to Hawaii from Brazil back in the 1820s, but it was actually a small island near Hawaii that was by the name of Manoa Valley on Oahu, but on this particular location, the coffee didn't really grow that well. It didn't take. So it was 3 years later when coffee made its way to the Big Island, and they started growing coffee in the Kona region of the large island, and the gentleman by the name of Reverend Samuel Ruggles took some of the seedlings from the Manoa region and planted the first ever coffee trees in the Kona region on the westward volcanic slopes of Hawaii. And so that's how coffee made its way to Hawaii. But coffee didn't become famous. Hawaiian coffee didn't become famous like immediately. It took like 50 years for coffee to make its way into international fame, where the growers of the Kona coffee actually entered into a competition in Vienna, Austria, I believe it is, where they won a fair. It's a world fair in 1873, yeah, in Vienna, Austria, and that's where Kona first received its first its first international accolades, hinting at the future of the coffee's potential. But it wasn't until the late 1980s until Hawaii coffee actually started to boom. And the reason why that is because at the early 1800s and mid 1800s, even the late 1800s, coffee was still, or not coffee, Hawaii was still known for its sugar and pineapple exports. That was their cash crops. But in the 1980s, those cash crops started to dwindle, and they weren't making as much money from their pineapple and sugar exports, or the demand for it wasn't as much. But the demand for high quality coffee was booming, and so the Kona coffee started to replace or repurpose all these sugar plants and all the sugar farms and the pineapple farms with the coffee farms. And it wasn't until the 1982 when the owner of the Kau plant actually started to repurpose his sugar farms into the what we now know as Hawaii Kau. And when he first started growing their coffee there at the Kau plantation, they weren't actually they didn't have their own individual bag of coffee. They were actually part of the Kona plantation. So they didn't have their own brand yet. And so every year they would go to festivals and stuff and show off their coffee. But they still, in the very beginning, they contributed to the Kona blend. Ooh, that's good. And so they would contribute to the Kona blend coffee, and it wasn't until the late 1990s is when the Kau farmers actually went to a competition in America. I forget the name of it. Let me see if I can find the name for you guys. But they went to a competition in America where these all these farms come to show off their roasts and their beans, and kind of get a international fame to their coffee. It kind of gives them their own name, and so they actually won a prestigious award for their particular blend of coffee, and it kind of put their brand out there, and so now they have their name. And since then they've won 3 awards for their coffee. And so this particular blend of coffee is only around 30 years old, 33 years old. It's a year older than I am. So it's not very old in terms of coffee. And then when coffee first came to Hawaii, it was first introduced with Brazil, coffee from Brazil. And then it wasn't until 50 years later when the coffee farmers started to refine their coffee roasting and their coffee growing, when they wanted to bolster their farms with the Guatemalan coffee, because Guatemalan is renowned for its like chocolate notes or its sweet nutty notes. And so they wanted to bolster their crops with this Guatemalan coffee, and it pretty much became the main staple of the crop because it really took well. It adapted to the environment really good, and then the flavor notes that you get from this particular Arabica coffee that's being grown from volcanic soil and the just the lush ground that has like all these nutrients from the rich nitrogen, and then you have the repurposed farms that have probably had most of its like compost put back into the soil, so you have like these nutrient rich farms that are growing this brand new crop, and then it's adapting to the environment, and you're creating this exceptional cup of coffee. It's really cool to see how coffee has evolved in Hawaii, and how the fall of different crops gave way to the rise of coffee itself, and the different things that farmers are doing to really get their name out there, and the pride that they have for their particular blend. Because, I mean, if the grower of this particular coffee, the Ka'u blend, if he would have never entered in those competitions and gone to these festivals for coffee, they probably would still be just a contributor to the Kona Coffee. But because they're able to show their passion and really, give a name to their coffee, they actually have their own bag now. They have their own story. So it's really cool to learn how a farmer from Hawaii who used to grow sugar, and during the time period of the sugar crops losing their worth and value, switching over to coffee in a time where gourmet or exquisite coffee blends are requested all around the world, and then really making it to where you're not just contributing to someone else's gourmet blend, but then you're able to get out there and make your own gourmet blend. It's really an inspiring story because you're really talking about someone who really had something going, and then because of the changing world lost something, and then adapted to the new world by growing coffee. But because he had to adapt to a new world, he had to start down at the bottom kind of, and he worked his way up, and through perseverance and dedication and continually striving to be one of the best coffee growers, we now have the Hawaii Ka'u blend. It's not Hawaii Kona, but Hawaii Ka'u. So it's got its own name, own brand, and that is the story of this farmer. And so it's really cool to learn how coffee made its way to Hawaii, and how Hawaii has evolved over time from different types of farms to pretty much widely available coffee for Kona, and then now what is now known as Ka'u. It's a really, really cool story, you guys. A lot of stuff happened in Hawaii. A lot of things happened in between. That's probably why some of the things kind of took a pause, especially during World War II. There was a lot of things that happened, as we know. But then once World War II was over, that's kind of pretty much when you see a lot of these coffee farms thrive. So coffee kind of helped rehabilitate the land and the farmers and stuff, and then they were able to rebuild and repair everything. So that's important too with this story. So the story of the farmers, and then how coffee made its way to Hawaii is a really cool story. And then how this particular farmer was able to take his own coffee And instead of being a contributor to a gourmet blend, he actually made his coffee a gourmet blend with its own brand that is known today. So that's really cool. If you guys enjoyed today's coffee tasting, go ahead and hit the link down below. That's going to be a list of all the videos that I've done in the past. And then the video above is just a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Thanks again for watching, you guys. Have a great day.